In 2001, I brought together 20 senior military, intelligence, and aerospace whistleblowers at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., for a press conference that would change the world forever. The men and women who are on this stage and the some 350 additional military intelligence witnesses to the so-called UFO matter and extraterrestrial intelligence can prove and will prove that we are not alone. This marked the public debut of the Disclosure Project and the launch of the global disclosure movement to end UFO secrecy and disclose technologies that would end poverty, climate change, and the use of fossil fuels overnight and transform every aspect of life on Earth. One of the biggest bombshells at that 2001 press conference was the testimony of Carol Rosin, an aerospace executive who worked beside Wernher von Braun, the Nazi rocket scientist who came to America after World War II to work for NASA. Carol received his deathbed confession, a testimony so terrifying that we spent the last 20 years trying to warn about it.
Now here was von Braun sitting at a desk when I first met him, explaining to me that he was told he only had 3 to 6 weeks to live, but that he was going to stay alive long enough to teach me what the real game is that's going on. And it started out when I was in the industry, the Russians were the threat. We had to build space-based weapons against the Russians. And then third world countries called nations of concern at that time. And then the asteroid threat, which I thought was kind of comical that we could just put weapons up there to shoot down or steer an asteroid. And then it leads to the last card.
And then he would repeat to me over and over, and the last card, the last card, the last card would be the extraterrestrial threat.
He explained to me that there was a moment when we were going to be told that the extraterrestrial beings, that their craft were a threat, and they were not.
These craft that have come here are now not UFOs, they're identified flying objects, and we know that they have beings in them. And we have witnesses here who have told you that they can shut down our missile silos. They can stop a rocket going into space that's a test. We have witnesses here who have worked in the classified departments who have the courage to come forward here to support what Wernher von Braun told me back in 1974 to 77.
At the end, I said, and it's all a lie. Well, it's still all a lie.
The ultimate dream of the dialectical war machine, the military-industrial complex, is to have this war with a potential extraterrestrial civilization. It's their dream of all times. You know, you can roll into place all the kind of strictures of a national security state. You can spend literally trillions of dollars a year on massive military equipment, super high-tech equipment, et cetera. And so that it's logical that they would use that as an excuse. And we do know from repeated examples of it that the utilization of a false flag operation to initiate a war goes on over and over and over again. Our human family does that. The nation states do that. Hitler has done it. They dress up troops looking like some other neutral country they want to invade and have their own troops dress up like them and pretend they've assaulted somebody, and they rush in and attack that country. You know, it's gone on and on.
When von Braun talked to me about this faked extraterrestrial, he called it a faked alien invasion that was being planned, I saw on a board a list of countries against whom we were going to build space-based weapons. I called Wesley Clark, and he answered the phone. And I said, well, you know, what is it about? And he said, well, I asked that question, what is it about? And the guy at the desk said, I don't know.
In its paper, published in 2000, Rebuilding America's Defenses, the neoconservative think tank Project for the New American Century asserted that only a, quote, new Pearl Harbor would generate the political will for the military and defense policy transformations the group desired. Indeed, these traumatizing events are always planned or hijacked in order to manipulate perception and manufacture consent for military action and the theft of our wealth and liberty.
George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, and others had decided to go to war with Iraq long before Colin Powell gave that presentation. I feel like it was the lowest point in my professional and personal life that I had a hand in managing it.
But we've come a long way since the 9/11 attacks. That same document that called for a new Pearl Harbor goes on to describe how we need to put weapons in space, and even predicts the creation of the Space Force. For a complete fascist takeover, the men behind the curtain will have to play their final card, a cosmic 9/11.
This temptation to generate a false flag attack on the part of some extraterrestrial civilization, you even hear people like Ronald Reagan make reference to it.
Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bound. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
Wouldn't it be clear if we all of a sudden found ourselves being attacked by an extraterrestrial civilization? We'd finally all come together. Wouldn't that be really lovely? Well, it's not really lovely for the industrial state. They don't want to lose their other enemies first. They want to use up all that before they go to that extreme.
The last card was the most profound experience I had in my whole life, and I accepted the mission. And until Steven Greer picked me up and talked me into going to the Disclosure Project, when I had just about given up, that's when I saw that there were other witnesses to what's going on, to the truth, to the facts.
When she told me what Wernher von Braun had said, it didn't surprise me, because I had previously met with a number of people in the defense industry and in the intelligence community who had already told me that there was such a plan and that it could be actuated at any moment. Truth seekers who explore the wonders of the ET phenomenon walk an extremely dangerous path. Most get sucked into the gravitational pull of the black hole of disinformation, where lies about the UFO cover-up and about ETs themselves poison the minds of even the smartest and most well-intentioned investigators. These lies include ETs are demons. It's all interdimensional, not extraterrestrial. We don't have man-made UFOs. Aliens are abducting people. And the worst one of all, aliens are a threat. Therefore, we need to build weapons in space.
If we cannot commit to no weapons in space, to no war in space, then we're going to continue to have wars on Earth, and we're going to continue at the accelerated pace that we're in right now towards our own human extinction.
One of the difficult things of the last 6 months was that I learned that the same group that had been feeding false information to the public through TTSA had their counterparts that had been going into the president's office providing some information, but a lot of disinformation. So the way really good counterintelligence works, or disinformation works, is that at the core of it, there's some truth. So they'd say, okay, the aliens are here, and here's some evidence, but they're a threat to the national security, and we need to have the Space Force.
Wow, Space Force.
And they get into this thing called the White House and the national security state, and they're completely at the mercy of the people who are going to brief them, and the ones who are assigned and cleared to talk about this issue, by definition, have been in those clandestine operations. I did a video brief for the president, vice president, and also for President Putin. Now, the problem is, by the time I had good access, they had already been, unfortunately, quite brainwashed on this, had already taken policy steps that included the Space Force creation and what have you, and then we were running up against the election. It's sort of a shadow government within the government, not just in the United States, but all around the world. And the kind of power they have, both financially, technologically, and the means of projecting power militarily is much greater than anything that the conventional military or the conventional government or the President of the United States has. Eisenhower knew it, and by the time he left office was very upset about it.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The ETs actually had reached out to Eisenhower near what's now Edwards Air Force Base, Muroc, and really wanted us to stop disrupting the fabric of the universe with these nuclear weapons and advance in a positive way into space and become part of an interplanetary family, which would have been wonderful for humanity, wonderful for the cosmos. But the people who make a lot of money from war and a lot of control of the populace through fear did not want that. So they circled their limousines and sort of moved aside the good people who would have been arguing for that. And that included Eisenhower.
We must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite.
The fascist element that is owning most of the stock in the major corporations, especially the oil corporations and the natural gas corporations and the pharmaceutical industry, the railroads, the shipping lines. Virtually all these people are fascists, all during the robber baron era. That's what they did. They laid claim to those areas of our American economy, and they've never relinquished them.
Those families and those interests became the foundation of the post-World War II military and intelligence and industrialists. They knew that after we had detonated the atomic bomb, there were ET craft seen all over, wherever we were doing experimentation or storage or launches or anything, or even research and development. The ETs were very concerned about that for reasons we'll get into. So the military-industrial complex, as Eisenhower called it, became very powerful and developed clandestine, covert, unacknowledged special access projects that eventually moved the president out of the way and pushed Eisenhower outside the inner circle.
That whole concept of fascism, and it's a word that gets totally misused because people somehow conflate it with just authoritarianism. But it's a very narrow definition, and it's an accurate definition of what it was that the Central Intelligence Agency was doing, actually promulgating the private interest of the major corporations. And they were putting at the disposal of the interests of those corporations all of the instrumentalities of the United States government, most importantly, the military and their intelligence operations and their covert operations.
We're keeping the oil. We have the oil. The oil is secure. We left troops behind only for the oil.
Because they basically believed that what's good for General Motors is good for America. And it was an entire theory of economic development. And so that they viewed anybody who interfered with that in any way at all as an enemy of the United States. And so that's how the national security state got really established and institutionalized. And so that when they encounter an event like Roswell, where this extraordinary technology crashes, they realize that there's this extraterrestrial civilization that's got this technology that is way beyond anything we've got. Their instantaneous response to that was, let's get it for us. And that we'll have it, and it'll give us this overwhelming advantage over any of our adversaries that are threatening our world dominion, or our, what they call full spectrum dominance, was their actual term that they used.
That fascism and the fascistic proclivities of these big industrialists and very powerful people, they know they really can't control 8 billion people unless they first control their minds and their beliefs and their attitudes. As Nazi war criminal Hermann Göring said at the Nuremberg trial, the people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. This is easy. All you have to do is tell them they are being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. It works the same in any country. The buffoonery of the Third Reich was instructive, and they learned that that kind of behavior wouldn't be effective. So they went subterranean. They went covert. People don't understand. We won the battle of World War II. We did not win that war. We kicked the hornet's nest because we actually were doing more damage in those other dimensions and worlds than we were doing here. Step in the shoes of a generic extraterrestrial who's tied into a civilization that's interstellar capable. And you are observing that in one person's lifespan, 100 years or so, we're going from guns and maybe cannons and a machine gun in World War I to thermonuclear weapons, then into the space age. Then these clandestine and covert unacknowledged projects develop weapon systems based on studying extraterrestrial systems, and then beginning to put them on satellites, on aircraft, and on ships, and on land-based systems. So the ETs are sitting back and looking at this in its aggregate, and now we're decades into the solutions for poverty in the environment, decades into the ability to have a new economy that would be just, and also would be a space economy. We could be out in space peacefully. We're decades to when we should have ended the war to end all wars was supposed to be World War I. What have we done? One war after another. Now they want to launch the big one, this final card that Wernher von Braun spoke of, interplanetary war, by hoaxing an alien threat. So these civilizations are really quite appalled, frankly. And at the same time, we're using weapons like atomic and nuclear that disrupt the fabric of the universe, and their worlds are affected.
We knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. I suppose we all thought that, one way or another.
I am death, the destroyer of worlds, plural. Worlds, plurals, not just this planet. If they were hostile, they would have just eliminated all that testing. They don't. I find out that is not the way they operate. They warn. They say, what the heck are you doing to your beautiful planet? And you have a choice. We have a choice. We can listen, or we can let it happen.
If people are watching the media right now, they're not hearing about the peaceful extraterrestrial craft. What they're seeing are released, supposedly leaked documents, leaked videos, much of which is not even true. They're not real. It's faked right there. And it's being presented in a format that is to cause fear, to make us see the crafts and the beings as enemies.
People who would consider themselves New Age and into all this stuff fall into these camps of, well, there are the good aliens and the bad aliens. And the good aliens almost always look like someone from Norway. And the bad ones have different features or maybe darker. I'm going, this is racism. You just call it out what it is. This is absolutely racism extrapolated into an interspecies level.
Not just racism, but speciesism, which is even deeper. We have to try to overcome this. We have to train ourselves.
They're hoping that we as humans evolve out of this mindset of ingrained racist tribalism and not go down the path that these covert interests want us to do and extrapolate into space, push out into space the racist world we've had. I call it exo-racism. Justification for war or genocide always begins with dehumanization of the enemy. For example, as part of their anti-Semitic propaganda campaign, the Nazis revived the centuries-old blood libel, the allegation that Jews murder non-Jews, especially Christian children, in order to obtain blood for the Passover or other rituals, in order to lay the foundation for a false flag alien threat. The national security state has engaged in a similar propaganda campaign for decades, a cosmic blood libel.
The national security state apparatus and their media allies have been flogging that particular theory that these extraterrestrial civilizations are all here to eat us or to take over our planet and rape our women. There's a whole scenario that's always gone on the part of authoritarian warrior states. About the ultimate other, the Hun. 95% of all of the movies that have ever been made about extraterrestrial life have portrayed them as hostile and dangerous to us, you know, and it sells in that way. I don't know why people watch those movies. But on the other hand, I don't know why people watch cage fighting either.
When Unacknowledged went viral and got hundreds of millions of people to see it, within months, they stood up the TTSA with Luis Elizondo, who is a famous disinformation operative in the Pentagon, at least amongst intelligence officials that I've met with, and others who are well-known disinformation figures within the UFO subject. That began the whole process of trying to pull the narrative back to, gee, we don't know what these are, but here's the evidence that we're, quote, leaking, which wasn't a leak, it was a controlled release. And then they hit the button, so the mainstream media that will take dictation from the intelligence community begins to cover it in the New York Times and CNN and every network around the world. Whereas the Disclosure Project has 100 times more direct military witnesses and better evidence. And they wouldn't touch it because it doesn't have the threat narrative attached. It doesn't have the agenda attached. The facts about UFOs are so much stranger than the lies that you discredit yourself simply by telling the truth, especially when it comes to so-called alien abductions. Perhaps the most devastating aspect of the cosmic blood libel is the hoaxing of alien abductions by humans in order to create a culture of fear towards extraterrestrials. Dozens of insiders have confessed this secret to me, but it wasn't until 2016 that I was able to get one of them to say so on camera.
We did do that, yes. OSI did that. There was a special group out of the 7602nd Air Intel Wing at Fort Belvoir that came out and did that.
We have these technologies. They are being used in false flag operations where they hoax events. And the purpose for all of that is a sort of psychological warfare, as it says in the CIA document I have, the director of the CIA saying, the UFO subject is very valuable for its psychological warfare potential. And that is a very interesting thing to be written in 1953, right? And what does that really mean? Well, it means that the long-term defense strategy from the late 40s and 50s forward was informed by eventually using this last card to consolidate sort of a global totalitarian military control of the population.
Could it be manipulated purposely by people who have the technology to simulate UFO sightings? And people say, well, of course not. Who would do a thing like that? Well, I would remind you that during the Watergate investigation, it was discovered that there was a plan originated in the White House to surface a submarine off the coast of Cuba and paint the second coming of Christ over the island of Cuba using holograms. Which is well within our technology today. The idea was that since there is a large Catholic population in Cuba, they would be so upset by this vision that this would saturate the communication channels, you know, the telephone system in Cuba, long enough for an invasion to take place.
There are three major lies of the current false flag disclosure of UFOs in the media. Number one, we do not know what UFOs are. Lie. Number two, the U.S. military does not have any aircraft that can perform in the way these UFOs maneuver. Lie. Number three, they are a threat to national security. Lie. The only threat to national security and world peace is the unacknowledged projects using man-made UFOs and other technologies to hoax alien events, period. Former Blink-182 frontman Tom DeLonge launched To the Stars Academy, or TTSA, supposedly to bring scientists and whistleblowers together to advance the disclosure of UFOs. In reality, this was a thinly veiled front group for the Defense Intelligence Agency, staffed with notorious spooks like Jim Semivan, the former head of covert operations, domestic, for the CIA. All of a sudden, the same media outlets that historically ridiculed this subject started fawning over DeLong and his entourage of disinformation agents, and always with the specter of an alien threat. Quite the contrary. Over the years, dozens of defense and aerospace industry insiders have briefed me on what they were really working on at places like the Lockheed Skunk Works, going back to the 1940s and 50s. Many of these man-made aircraft have been spotted by thousands of eyewitnesses and become part of the UFO lore, indistinguishable from actual ET craft. These rogue, covert operations within the military-industrial complex stage thousands of sightings, abductions, mutilations, and disturbing encounters with our public-facing military, knowing these incidents will be mistaken for ET craft. This confusion between what is extraterrestrial and what is man-made is essential for pulling off a false flag that would be blamed on aliens.
Which ones are man-made and which ones are extraterrestrial beings? Dr. Greer is figuring this out. We've got to listen to this information. These are facts. This is not rhetoric. And then we've got to be able to apply it. We're taught to be afraid. We're taught to fear. We're taught to fear extraterrestrial beings. Really? Get over it.
Meanwhile, you have people who would purport to be experts in UFOs going on Fox News and other news outlets saying, we don't really know what these are. It's a big mystery.
Doing that in the context of meriting citizenship in a galactic civilization is a very meaningful meme. To say, look, we need to work on ourselves. We need to elevate our consciousness. We need to hearken to the higher angels of our own nature, etc. That's all a dynamic that we do have control over. That's why I think the CE5 thing is so important, because that's the best way to get data, not to be speculating, from our own political ideology about what they might be like. We really have to have direct communication with these beings. The more, the better. That dual role of elevating our own consciousness and rising to the highest levels of the angels of our own human nature on the one hand, and reaching out to establish communion and contact with the extraterrestrial beings themselves are the two pathways that we have. And in dealing with the national security state, we just have to take whatever steps we can in the legislative realm to impose treaties to keep us from doing things like militarizing space and developing space weapons and all that kind of stuff. That's another third leg of this stool that we have to really do to exercise whatever kind of control we can have over the political realm.
And that, I think, is the only way we're going to have not just world peace. World peace should have happened at the end of World War I. We have to have universal peace. At this point, world peace is too late. We're already in an interstellar moment. We're already in a cosmic time. So we have to have universal peace. And universal peace comes from both our external policies and behaviors and from within, the great peace within, the state of universal consciousness.
Something strange is happening. We are living through the most extraordinary moment in human history. After decades of denial and ridicule, government officials and the mainstream media are admitting that extraterrestrial civilizations are visiting Earth. But there's a twist. The same people and institutions who lied about ETs and just about everything else are now framing the extraterrestrial presence as a threat.
And we are seriously thinking of the Space Force.
One man has been trying to warn us about this for decades.
If you're seeing this, it's because I am either dead or have been entrapped or have disappeared.
Most of us are ill-prepared for open contact with an advanced ET civilization. As our expanding cosmology outgrows our theological institutions, modern human society is spiraling into decadence, narcissism, depravity, and nihilism.
Catch me outside, how about that?
If we want to truly understand ETs, their technology, and their intentions, we have to readdress our assumptions about the nature of reality and our relationship with the physical universe.
On the surface, oh, UFOs are real, there are these machines zipping through the sky. But one of the things I've always said is, well, that's interesting, and it's cool, and it's great to see them. But what's really interesting are the people on board those spacecraft. They're intelligent, they're conscious, they're here, they're interested. Why are they here otherwise? But no one has made the question, how do we develop that relationship with the occupants of the UFOs? That's what this is about. It's going from just sort of a materialistic view, there's a machine flying around the sky, and sort of a superficial view of it, to a deeper truth of who's on board, why are they here? What is their relationship to humanity, perhaps the origins of the human race? What are we to do to create a relationship with them, and how do we do that? What is the foundation of a relationship between humans at this stage of our evolution and civilizations that are hundreds of thousands to millions of years more developed technologically and socially and perhaps in consciousness? We have to find where that point of commonality is. I have put a briefing together for every president since Bill Clinton, and to the extent that they know anything, it doesn't mean they have control over these covert programs. The unacknowledged special access projects are run in a way that they are outside the purview and control of the president or the Congress. And for that reason, our elected representatives are unlikely to resolve this problem. But we can resolve it by going directly to these civilizations and saying, we're here. You can make contact with us. We're unarmed. We are friendly. This got on the radar of the intelligence community, and they knew that we had come across the Rosetta Stone of contacting and communicating with interstellar civilizations, and it worked. That is what started the intelligence community coming after what we were saying and doing and trying to intercept it. This is, in fact, cosmic disobedience on a grand scale. We're going to bypass the sociopaths in these covert programs and do this directly. It's the same thing with the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement would have never happened from the top down. Even the Kennedy brothers did not want to step into that mess. It took a mass of people, not just Martin Luther King, but millions of people all over the country doing sit-ins and lunch counter sit-ins and buses and what have you, to change that direction of our civilization out of Jim Crow onto a society that is, while not perfect, is more open and inclusive than it was. Well, the same has to happen here. And to do that, we have to understand what cosmic consciousness is and what the nature of the cosmic mind is that is resonating within every single human being. Because that's the foundation for the relationship between humans and these civilizations. By doing it directly, all of us are going to know what the truth is. You don't have to go through a proxy or someone who's telling you secondhand. But it also creates a movement globally to show these civilizations that there are people on this planet who are enlightened and conscious and peaceful, which is the majority of humans. Because real disclosure is humans making contact with these civilizations directly. And these civilizations are waiting for us to do it. And so this is our opportunity. This is our moment. And it really is we, the people, that have to do it.
The question is often asked, when will UFO disclosure happen? The answer is, it has already happened. It happened in 2001 at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., where military, NASA, and intelligence agency whistleblowers testified to their involvement in the UFO cover-up and the back engineering of extraterrestrial technologies. It happened again in 2017 with the release of the film Unacknowledged, in anticipation of which the CIA and the FBI published millions of UFO documents on their websites. Despite all this, nothing has really changed. Life goes on as before, except there is a new narrative unfolding in the mainstream media, one that is designed to subvert true disclosure and extinguish the opportunity for transformation available to us through these revelations.
So in the 1990s, I wrote a paper called When Disclosure Serves Secrecy. And what that means is there are two kinds of disclosures that might happen. A truthful one that is also a hopeful one, which is what I gave up my medical career to try to actuate and do. And then there's the one that is spun by the spin meisters in Washington and at the Pentagon and CIA, which runs like this. It's true, the UFOs are real. They're here as a threat. They're violating our airspace. They're a national security and a threat to our sovereignty. I'm quoting.
The purpose of the program, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, was really designed to do just that. From a national security perspective, identify those things that we see and try to ascertain and determine if that information is a potential threat to national security.
And we knew this was going to happen because I had met with people who were in these classified projects, who were on interagency committees that had everything set to roll this out, and they were just waiting for the right time. The Soviet Union has ended. We have the global terrorism, while it's still there, it's not like it was around 9/11. This is the next big thing that they want the public to be afraid of.
When a pickpocket meets a saint, all he sees are his pockets. Or like if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And it's not that this isn't a genuine perception on their part, because they've been raised, their entire political and professional career has been designed to have this kind of artificial construct of this. There's this national airspace and nobody can come into the airspace unless we say so. And they've got this super control mechanism going. And they're right at this really important place right now where they're attempting to establish a kind of one world government. You know, that they've gotten the communication systems up, the transportation systems up, and they want to establish a planetary government. And there's nothing that is going to motivate the creation of a one world government like the discovery of an ultimate other. Ronald Reagan was standing in front of the United Nations. He said it right out.
Perhaps we need some outside universal threat. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
He was silly enough to say it. You know, that's part of his naivete. But the fact is that is their agenda.
And as one member of a royal family told me, we need to do things so that the public will accept in blood and treasure the sacrifices needed to have an interplanetary war. I'm quoting.
Bombshell CIA documents, previously published by the Disclosure Project, reveal a decades-long psychological warfare campaign to cultivate a culture of fear towards extraterrestrials.
And it's interesting that Hollywood and the clandestine services are both spend most of their time convincing people that something that's not true is in fact true. I think probably Hollywood is full of CIA agents, and we just don't know it. And I wouldn't be surprised at all to discover that this was extremely common.
Let's go out into space and look at our planet over the last 100 years. World wars, hundreds of millions of people killed in war, the advent of weapons of mass destruction, our going into space in a competitive way with the Soviet Union for the Apollo projects and others, the degradation and destruction of our environment, our targeting of extraterrestrial assets around the Earth and in space, and successfully killing many ETs and downing their spacecraft. Out here in Fort Huachuca in Arizona, there's an underground facility where there are 9 different ET craft that are there with all the autopsied bodies. There's a man on my team who used to work in that facility near Tombstone, Arizona, not coincidentally, perhaps.
This footage, captured by NASA's Discovery Space Shuttle on September 15, 1991, shows an extraterrestrial vehicle dodge an electronic weapon fired from Earth. Here, we see the craft slowly crossing the frame. There's a bright flash, and then it makes an abrupt right angle turn and flies off. Moments after the turn, we see the shot fired across space where the craft had just been.
Knowing all that, if they were hostile in the way we think of an invading hostile force, that would have been made abundantly clear to us the day we detonated the first atomic bomb. The fact is they have shown remarkable restraint, almost a level of a Gandhian pacifism, not to have pushed back. So the threat isn't extraterrestrial, the threat is covert human. These secret projects are an existential threat to Earth, the environment, and to our peace in space and relationship with these civilizations. I remember being at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where a lot of the Roswell stuff ended up, and it was the Foreign Technology Division of the Air Force. And I was there to do a briefing, and the colonel said, well, what if these civilizations are a threat? He was trying to bring me into that view. And I said, sir, with all due respect, given the galactically stupid things you have been doing, if they were a threat, you would know it by now, and we would not be having this conversation and breathing the free air of Earth. It would have been point, set, match, over. What are the technologies that would permit an interstellar civilization to go from one star system to another? Now, we're not talking about Elon Musk's SpaceX or the Apollo rocket. We're talking technologically advances that are in the hundreds of thousands to millions of years past what we have operating on this planet. Those technological breakthroughs, if they were weaponized and in the possession of a hostile force, would be so devastating that you could target a planet and turn it into a pink mist floating through the cosmos if you were a hostile entity. What I have discovered in our contact with these civilizations, and we have had many hundreds of contact experiences with our CE5 teams around the world over the last 30 years, is that none of them are hostile, but quite a few of them are very concerned about our hostility and are doing things to try to contain that.
But our destiny beyond the Earth is not only a matter of national identity, but a matter of national security. It is not enough to merely have an American presence in space. We must have American dominance in space.
They want to project out into the stars their dominion. Our job is to get people to understand that that is not what our mission is as a human species. We need to lay back, participate with all other sentient life in the universe, and merit a proper position in the galactic federation, not be the big bully on the block.
Some years ago, I had a meeting with the Crown Prince of Liechtenstein, Hans Adam von Liechtenstein. He had reached out to me through some of his contacts. He said, look, Dr. Greer, we have to meet, but we can't talk about this on the phone. Your efforts to effect disclosure are noble, but they will not be able to be permitted, and not for the reasons you think. I said, well, this is interesting. Finally, we got together in New York City in July of 1994. He said to me, in 1989, a group of us were trying to do disclosure, and it involved Gorbachev, President Bush Sr., himself, and the UN Secretary General Pérez de Cuéllar. And in the course of us putting together the high-level planning meetings to do this, Pérez de Cuéllar, the UN Secretary General, was abducted out of his limousine in Manhattan. He was told by the aliens that if they did not cease and desist from their plans to disclose this information, that every world leader involved, including the President of the United States, would be abducted. This blew up like an atomic bomb in the Bush White House, and it did not go forward. I said, okay, well, tell me more. He says, well, we've concluded that we have to prepare the public for an interplanetary war. And in doing so, we can then also force the return of Christ. And I'm quoting. And I just listened. He didn't know that I knew that the means for that abduction for Pérez de Cuéllar were run by a counterintelligence unit out of the national security state that had the technologies to simulate an alien craft and aliens run completely by military assets, and that there was a deeper part of these unacknowledged special access projects that were zooming even people like Bush Sr., who was on the committee but had lost control of some of these renegade factions. This is a very complicated story. Paris de Cuellar being abducted caused him to stop that process. It manipulated these leaders into going onto a war footing. And he confessed to me that the reason he was funding the work of the abduction groups was because they wanted to put information out to the public that would scare the public so that people would make the sacrifice in blood and treasure to have an interplanetary war. Now, this is 25 years ago. It was not a happy meeting for me.
If there's any one thing that is going to mobilize people to allow the national security state to establish full spectrum dominance over our planet, it is this. The beings themselves, interestingly enough and very importantly, aren't putting out their own story. They're not doing that yet. They're trying to get us to understand it. They're trying to give us warnings. They're trying to help raise our consciousness, which is a critical part of this entire operation going on, and trying to get us to do this for ourselves. That's what this is all about. But the national security state realizes that that's a slower process, so they're now trying to hurry this up. There's a kind of an emergency process underway right now. Make no mistake about that.
When I was briefing the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, the very first thing he asked wasn't about this subject. He looked at me, he says, "Dr. Greer, what we don't understand is why you haven't killed yourself yet." He said, "Well, my dad knew about some of this way back in the 60s. No one would do anything about it. So he took his revolver and ate his gun and blew his head off." Now, this is a 3-star general telling me this story in the first 10 minutes we're together. I said, "Well, I'm sorry that happened to you, but I understand where your dad was coming from." Because it's sort of this, anyway.
Oh, take a breath.
Now, the truth is, there are a lot of people who've been on my team who are military, who've killed themselves, others who've been assassinated. So the other thing that keeps me up is, survivor guilt. Sorry.
The national security state people, and potentially working with and through the To the Stars Academy, are going to be pitching this problem. Saying, well, we can't just let our whole civilization know that there's this highly advanced, technologically superior society out there, and because our whole culture will collapse. Whereas, in fact, it's quite clear that it's their defense of the elite, this 1% of the human family that basically ends up controlling over 40% of all of the wealth on the planet, that they're really defending. And it's their world that they're trying to defend. So that you see that this is a subset of a larger question about how spiritual consciousness and the evolution of consciousness, of understanding what we really are in the makeup of the universe, is a threat in itself to this elite. Because that is the dissolving away of these kind of differences among ourselves, and this coming into a full ownership of our proper place in the universe puts these people out of business as the ruling elite. And so that the raising of consciousness of our human family is so closely related to the opening onto the extraterrestrial experience that both of them together are viewed as a threat by the elite. What they're afraid of is that this is such an accelerator as people have these repeated contacts with the extraterrestrials, their whole consciousness starts to rise. They start becoming aware of the fact that we're damaging our environment. They can become aware of the fact that nuclear weapons are kind of an insane thing to have. War is a really bad idea. This is a spiritual experience. It's a spiritual stimulation that's coming. We have to participate in consciously evolving these faculties that we have that can directly experience dimensions of reality that at the present time are out beyond our direct immediate sensorial system. That's what we're engaged in. That's what this is all about. And that's what these beings are. These beings obviously probably come from like a red dwarf star, some of them, where they've been around 10 billion years longer than we have. And so they've evolved these other faculties in addition to being able to see and touch and taste and do the things they do, you know. And so people are saying, what is our relationship to these beings? Why is it that they even look as much as they do like us, or why we look like them? These are all profoundly important questions of our relationship with other sentient life in the universe, and to understand our place in the order of things.
When you accept what this science is showing us, that we are all connected, and you then say, well, hold on a second, if we're not just connected with human beings, but we're also connected with the plant life, with the planet itself, with the entire animal kingdom, and you begin to develop that deeper sense of empathy with all that, who's to say that that interconnectedness doesn't extend to all the other planets, to the cosmos? If we share that with extraterrestrials, what does that world look like?
If consciousness and thought can affect something at a distance, and at a very great distance, even many miles or thousands of miles away, instantaneously, what does that mean for us communicating with a civilization that is centered in the science of consciousness? And that is their chief operating system. It's not electromagnetic. They use it, but it's beyond that. So now add to everything we know about the internet and communications and telecom, and then add a deeper level of trans-dimensional physics that involve electronic devices very clearly picking up intended coherent thought. That's what you're dealing with. It's the means for us as a civilization to be anchored in something more profound than the superficial aspects of being, say, human. Because humanism isn't enough, because we're dealing with non-human life forms. Now we have to transcend even humanism and our common humanity into this idea that there has to be something more universal within us that's also within these extraterrestrial civilizations that bind us together. And luckily there is. It's this field of consciousness that is cosmic and universal. And that's what's inside everyone. It doesn't matter if it's a homeless person on the street or an MIT professor. If they are conscious and awake, the entirety of the cosmos is folded within them like a conscious quantum hologram, because consciousness isn't limited by space and time. People say, where do I have to go? Well, first you have to go within yourself, but you have to understand what yourself is. And there's your individual ego and self, but there's this deeper aspect of ourselves that is simultaneously interwoven. And when we go deep in meditation and connect to that, then we have reached the point that we can be an ambassador to the universe, because we have become universal.
Here. It just went out again.
The steps of this are that you sit in quiet consciousness, and you don't have to have a full-on samadhi or whatever, but just in quiet consciousness, connect to that aspect of your mind that is unbounded, and then intend to sense, feel, see, know where the ET craft is. It could be in another galaxy. Connect to those beings, politely invite them to come and visit you, and then you connect to their communication systems and their consciousness, which are integrated, and you show them where you are. So you kind of zoom in. It's almost like a vectoring, a zooming in from wherever they are to where you are. Let's say if you're in North Carolina, you're coming into Earth, you're coming into North America, the East Coast, the mountains, the Blue Ridge, zoom, down to a few square meters around where you are, where you clearly show them where you are. And you do this in a coherent thought sequence that is continuous.
Look at
I got it.
Oh my gosh.
Oh.
Wow.
It's very easy to do once you practice it for a while. The key thing is to first take about half an hour to meditate, go into quiet mind, then sense where they are, and then invite them. Well, people say, well, you're calling them. I say, well, no, it's not like that. You're actually making contact in consciousness and thought before they arrive in their craft or transdimensionally around you. And when the ETs approach us most profoundly is when everyone in the team is in a coherent state of consciousness and are clearly doing this with the intent. So some of these civilizations that we're interacting with on our teams are in the order of 1 billion years beyond our development. And all those beings in that civilization are in a state of unity consciousness that is so enlightened that they could be confused with, say, an angel or something, but they're not. They're not from, they're ETs with star systems and planets and bodies, but their level of consciousness would be at the level of, say, the highest spiritual realm. There's a precise correlation to the kind of technology that you will observe and the level of consciousness that civilization has attained. Let's take our own civilization. We're mostly still separate people, and we are operating through a reductionist separate paradigm. We're also still very violent and destructive. So let's look at our technologies. Oil, we're burning something and destroying the air. Nuclear power, we're splitting and tearing apart an atom to create heat, to turn a turbine, to create electricity. Coal, we're digging stuff up and destroying mountains and then burning this stuff in a fiery furnace. It's all very destructive. And so our technologies are a corollary to our inner state of consciousness.
In 1964, Soviet astronomer Nikolai Kardashev proposed a hypothetical scale of measuring a civilization's level of technological advancement based on the amount of energy they're able to utilize. A level 1 civilization, also called a planetary civilization, can use and store all the energy available on its planet.
At that point, their main focus becomes the development of higher states of consciousness. Because they have all the technologies to meet everyone's needs, there's no shortage. Their economic system is non-economic in the sense that there is an infinite abundance for everyone because of these technologies that can materialize things out of the substrate of space-time, the elementals of space-time. So at that point, a civilization becomes really focused on the development of higher states of consciousness. And as they evolve in consciousness, their technologies evolve with them. They will begin to then unfurl the mysteries of consciousness and the cities I mentioned earlier in the Vedas, but those get applied technologically, which include levitation, teleportation, dematerialization, bilocation, where the same object can be instantly, resonantly created and be in two places at once. Spacecraft can be completely 3D like you see a solid aircraft. It can be partially in this dimension, but shifted mostly into another dimension. So I liken this to like when you're turning a dial on an old AM radio and you can move it across and you suddenly pick up Chicago and New York at the same time. They're bleeding together, dimensional bleeding. And so often these ET craft will be partially in this dimension, but mostly out. And all that we will detect in this dimension might be an electronic signature, orb, or an object that appears and flashes in and out, a scintillation of light that then vanishes, or an object that comes in where it looks almost like a hologram of an ET being that will be standing amongst us, but it's an electronically teleported version of that conscious being. That's the other evidence I know they're not hostile. We've been all over the world, thousands of hours, with thousands of people, have had all manner of contact. at a distance, intimately, beings, ET beings appearing in our rooms, all kinds of things. No one has ever been harmed. No one has ever been harmed at all. This isn't an official document on the FBI website, sort of hidden in plain sight. But it really confirms everything that we're explaining, but also the experience we've had. And this isn't from 1947, so this is 72 years old. He goes through and describes that they are peaceful people, they traverse these dimensions, that they have these abilities in consciousness. He even relates to some of the Vedic terms of the kind of capabilities witnessed from these beings. Transformation at that 1% point. When a critical mass of people, and whether it's 1% or a fraction of that, depends on the state of consciousness of those who are practicing the meditation or a prayer or coherence. But at that point, you can shift an entire civilization. If we all become coherent, just 1% of us, like a molecule of helium, and we become aligned and coherent and move in the right direction, it will transform the other 99%, even though they don't know that we're doing it. And that's the beauty and the power of the structure of non-locality in consciousness, is that it's all interwoven, but there's enormous power when you're operating at that deeper level of consciousness. And that the intelligence community is very much afraid of, because that's something, A, they cannot control, and B, it would transcend their ability to alter the outcome.